demonstrating competence. And about 2 days before I came away on this particular trip, I was doing a mentoring session at one of the local championship shows, and it was a Doberman lady that I was doing. And so we sit down, right, talk to me about the dogs in front of you. And she starts off with, well, I don't like its quarters, I don't like its front, it could do a better lay back and shoulder, I said, can we just, sorry, judging is about spotting what you like and then taking the other things into account. So we go to the next class, they come in, talk about these dogs. Well, that one's too tall, that one's not square, I don't like this. I said, look, I'm going to be really brutal now. Honestly, please, we've got to look at virtues, because dogs without virtues are of very limited value. But dogs with lots of virtues, who carry their few faults well, are of tremendous value. So it's an emphasis on, the first step of judging is learning to appreciate what is good about the exhibit. And I almost always find, just as by way of another example, if ever, let's say, an American visits Crafts, or somebody from continental Europe visits the UK, or indeed, if we then do the same thing in the opposite direction, it's very, very easy to look at the dogs in front of you and start looking at all the things that you don't like about them, that you're unfamiliar with, and you're focusing on that. I always say to people, when you're in that privileged position, I guarantee you there's something in that entry which is better than you have got at home, something that you need, and it's this focusing on the good stuff before you then start taking the perhaps not so good into consideration. So in many previous seminars, we've also looked at the boxer in bits. So I might talk to you a little bit about shoulders, and I'll put an example of what I think is good, then we'll have some examples of what's not good, and it'll just be that photograph of that particular body part we're doing. We're not going to be doing that this afternoon. We're keeping our focus on the whole exhibit. This fourth point down is really, really important. All of the photographs that I've used today, there's not a single American dog in those photographs. They're boxers from around the world. They will be probably unfamiliar to you. And my kind of challenge, I've done that on purpose, is we shouldn't confuse familiarity with correctness. Quite often you get used to looking at one sort of thing, and all of a sudden, because it's so familiar to you, that is what's correct. I always use the example of boxer eyes, because they're so, we all communicate with our dogs through the eye, so that that's one of the most important parts from an owner point of view. And if you actually look at the boxer breed standard for eyes, it's really, really unhelpful. It doesn't even describe what shape they're supposed to be. It's so vague, it's incredible. And so I have to train myself, certainly if I go to the continental European shows, where you look at I don't really have the eyes on them. Well, yeah, but is it correct to the standard or not? It's not about what's familiar to me being correct. So that we shouldn't confuse, I say, familiarity with correctness. And most importantly, these are my opinions. I always like saying, because it used to have the shock value, people would look at me and think, oh my God, this can't be true, because it can't be that old. That's getting a little bit thinner now, unfortunately. But I have been in this breed for 43 years. I came to the ABC for the first time in 1993. So they're my opinions with the benefit of that length of experience. But look, I'm not, believe it or not, I'm not right on everything. Really happy to be challenged, really happy to have some debate and questions later as we step into the world of boxer excellence. Okay, and we're going to look at things as we go through different aspects of the standard. I tend to say to people all the time that if you don't have medium size and square, you don't have a boxer. Now, sometimes you can get a slightly taller exhibit which is exceedingly well balanced and doesn't come with the faults that oversized often brings with it. That can happen. But these are some of the first words of the standard. Medium size and square, in my opinion, are fundamental factors in correct breed type in a boxer. And square is one of those absolute things. You can't be, it drives me insane, people say, oh yeah, he's very square, isn't he? No. He's either square or he isn't. It's as simple as that. And I think, some parts of the standard, we talked about eyes earlier, are actually quite difficult, quite nuanced to get your head around. I find it honestly incredible when square is such a requirement, and quite frankly a primary school child can tell you what's square and what isn't, that it is one of the biggest problems we have in the breed, where quite a lot of exhibits are off square. It's fundamentally important, and the example up here I think is, sorry, it was a bitch that we owned many, many years ago, a bitch called Champion Romara Scotchmist of Winnerwook. She was a big winner at the time, she was a big producer as well, and I think one of her best qualities was the medium size and square. And this photo always used to slightly terrify me because it was back in the day we had to take these things to the shops that were developed. So I got the picture back, and excuse the scruffy trainers and all the rest of it. And I'm thinking, my God, this picture only comes up to my knees, she must be tiny. Thinking, like, too far too. And actually, thankfully, my knees are very, very much the breed standard, which I was delighted to discover. Okay, I slightly lose track of how the standard gets sort of amended and changed over the years, but categorically, in early versions of it, is this whole idea of this breed being a good blend of substance and elegance. And it, to me, it's an essential characteristic that they must have both. Now, we get into nuances here of, right, how much of one do you want compared to the other, and there's a little bit of preferencing that goes on in that debate. I think the Americans interpret it, well, they definitely interpret it differently to, let's say, the Europeans. I think over our side of the pond, we're sort of somewhere in the middle. But my point here is they should look like they've got something about them. You know, it is a working dog, it's a guard dog at the end of the day. So they do need that. Somebody once said to me many years ago that they like their dogs to be noble and the bitches to be elegant. So I always think that's quite an interesting kind of thought process. But you do need, you know, too much substance and they're cloddy and horrible, they're bull mastiffy. Too little substance and they're weedy and, you know. And the reason I put the picture on the right hand side, so on the left is a dog, on the right hand side is a bitch, is just because of the angle of it, is you want to walk around the front of the boxer and there needs to be some width about it. Quite often one of the most depressing animals to judge is one where they come in, they throw a fantastic outline, and you walk around the front of them, they're kind of cardboard cutouts because they don't, super outline, but they just don't have that width, that power about them. So I like that picture on the right. I think you'd agree there's a degree of elegance in there, but there is a degree of substance about it as well. And in my opinion, those examples, dog on the left, bitch on the right, are a pretty good balance of, they have a degree of substance about them, but equally they've got some elegance and nobility about them as well. Which I think is one of the aspects of the breed, I think that appeals to all of us is, you know, they're athletes, they're fit, they can, you know, there's something about a boxer. So this blend of substance and elegance is critical. This is a very old picture. This dog is a dog called Champion Gremlin Summer Storm. He was the breed record holder when I first came into boxers in the early 80s. And this whole concept of balance, I think, is fundamentally important, which is why I like the fact this dog is naturally freestanding, so he's perfectly four square. There is a balance between the forehand and the rear angulation. He's comfortably stood there, and static balance, I think you'll agree, you can get the feeling of that everything sort of is in the right place. But this absolutely essential balance, we'll talk about forehands and hindquarters as we go through the rest of the deck. But just an ability to stand comfortably in a balanced fashion, I think that dog demonstrates that. He was a very, very honest dog, a very, very good moving dog. Because he was so well made, he had a tendency, and you can't check size on there clearly because there's no reference point. Some people tend to say, oh, he was a bit on the small side. He wasn't, he was so well made that made him superficially look like he was a little bit on the small side. But actually, just, as I said, the static balance of that dog I think is quite remarkable. Okay, we'll start stretching you a little bit now. That's a bitch called Champion Marbleton Princess. The Marbleton kennels in the UK use a lot of continental breeding. That bitch was best of breed at Crufts 1 year. And as I said at the start, I'm going to put pictures up and it'll be the whole dog. The purpose of putting that particular picture up in this section is to let us think about one of the most difficult things in boxers, which is getting a good front assembly, but also with height at wither. Quite often what happens is you get the long upper arm, you get the good slope and lay of shoulder, and the minute, put the microphone down for 2 seconds, is, right, if you've got that angle going on, the minute it does that, you're getting more height at wither, because the angles are opening up, so the dog's got higher station. And it is something that certainly we've noticed over the years, it's exceedingly difficult to get a very well-made and well-laid shoulder, but still maintain that height at wither. Quite often you'll see the dogs with very good upper arm and lay of shoulder. If that is at the 90 degrees that we all aspire to, quite often they can look a bit dumpy and they're a little bit low at wither. And I think the minute you get that, of course the risk is you then don't get the slightly sloping top line and all the rest of it. It is possible to get, and I think that bit evidences decent forehand, decent angulation in front, evident forechest, and maintains that height at wither, which is why she's up there as the example. I think it's one of the most difficult, from a breeding point of view, it's also I think one of the most difficult things because it doesn't breed particularly true. I don't know if you listen to Kay Blade's, Pizer, I was near as Kay Blade, her show site interview, which has gone online. I've sent the link for yesterday. She was talking about standard poodles, and about forehands in standard poodles are, it's very difficult to get right. The forehand of a standard poodle is not massively different to a boxer. Doesn't breed particularly true. You get a dog that excels in it, you think you've cracked it, but it doesn't always come on in the next generation. But it's a thing of beauty when you do get that forechest, that good forehand angulation, and also the station that we're looking for. This was a photograph that I just happened across. I think it's an Australian pitch actually, but the reason she's up there is when we're talking about neck, because I think that is a pretty super boxer neck in terms of the angle it's coming out, the way it flows in at the withers. It's not a swan neck. There's no sense of weakness about it, but my God, there's a huge dollop of elegance and style that it adds to the overall outline. So I think set of neck, I think pretty good set of shoulders as well actually. I think neck and that ability to throw, the sharpness of outline that we're looking for is one of the things that probably attract us all to the breed in the first place. And of course, neck is so intimately related to shoulders, because if you haven't got the forehand made right, the neck tends to come up at a slightly abrupt angle. You then tend to get a whole load of sort of ugly angles and wrinkling going on there. That flow from between her ears smoothly all the way down and in at wither, I think is a very, very good example of what we are striving for. And then we think about top line. And if I'm being honest, I find it really hard to talk about top lines without including neck. Because to me, I know the purist and it isn't, but to me the top line actually starts from up here. It's that flow down, it's the flow into the withers, and then onto the slight slope. And I cannot stress enough how the slight slope, how much importance I attach to that. Now, of course, slight is it's one of these judgmental words. How slight is slight. And part of the reason I put one up here that was from several years ago, so it was still docked. I never quite knew where it originally came from, but this whole idea of, right, for a slight slope, if you drew a horizontal line across that skimmed the top of the withers, then it would skim the top of the originally docked tail, which of course you guys can still use, but we sadly can't. So I think that's a good example of a slight slope. I think it is a very, very ugly fault when you get these flat backs. You certainly see some around where if you drew that line across, it would be kind of chopping the croup off nearly, because it's sort of these flat tabletops. It tends to go hand in hand with slightly upright shoulders, not so much angulation behind it. It gives the impression of sort of being a capital H written down, which can be really, really ugly. But I think in terms of quality of top line and adherence to the standard and the slight slope, I would offer that as a pretty sound and good example. I always feel slightly sorry for underlines because they're kind of the ugly child. Everybody talks about top lines non-stop, and I know you don't really do critiques over here, but you know, a UK critique for a boxer will always mention top line. Very, very seldom will mention underline. And underline, I always used to hear it referred to as the line of beauty. The minute you don't get that graceful curve to the rear, it makes the exhibit look a bit common and quite often a bit cloddy. And it's one of those things I found over the years that if you're looking at a dog, you don't quite know why it's not floating your boat. Just have a look at the underline. That might be the reason, because they don't have enough underline. It just takes a degree of elegance and class away from them. So this graceful curve to the rear, the line of beauty, you don't want it as a kind of sharp cut up, and then the exhibit will appear a bit wasp-waisted. But as I say, you definitely don't want a flat line under there, because it really does rob the dog of elegance and style, in my opinion. This is a phrase that you've probably heard. It applies in a number of breeds actually, but this whole thought of, as we move on to quarters, this whole thought that in a boxer there should be quite a lot of dog behind the tail. You know, you like a nice arse on a boxer, and I think, you know, illustrated here, there's a lot of power in those quarters. So you know, behind the tail, there's still quite a lot going on. Good curve of upper and lower thigh, looks decently angulated. I tend to like using this bitch. There's a bitch called Champion Tarantron Glory Lass. She was the UK record holder for a number of years as well. And I always think with her, it's a lack of exaggeration. I can feel the sense of strength and power in those hindquarters. The breed stand in the UK and probably elsewhere used to refer to muscles standing out plastically under the skin, which I always think is quite a neat way. It's a good mental image to get in people's heads. So you don't want them looking like Mr. Universe, but you do want that sense of kind of strength and power. And it's sort of different. You're looking at that, and if you've got that in your ring, you're thinking, you know, I'm looking forward to sending that out on the move, because you know I think this will be, you know, interesting / exciting as it goes round. We were talking about balance earlier. Again, I think that's a pretty good picture of, you know, static balance, where the balance of angulation front and back looks pretty good. There's good slope of top line there, pretty decent neck, stands on good legs, a good blend as well, back to previous slides, of substance and elegance. Seems sort of a slight way. I was determined to use full pictures of everything for this. You're always going to get the full dog. The point on here around feet. One of the old all-rounders in the UK always used to talk about, you know, if you didn't have decent feet, it was like having flat tyres on a car, which is probably a slight exaggeration, but it's quite a nice way of bringing our focus onto it. We're quite blessed at home. We're certainly not blessed in all areas. Feet we tend to be quite blessed in terms of we don't need to worry about them too much, but nice tight cat feet undoubtedly helps enormously. Okay, and then we talked a little bit about bits. I always say if you want to really get my goat, just be a multi-breed judge who judges boxers by literally turning around and being on top of them and feeling and just. I always say I'd much rather judge a boxer from 20 metres away than I would from 1 metre away. Because how all this comes together in an eye-catching breed typical outline, to me is, you know, one of the most important features of this breed. For those of you that have heard me talk over the years, the other thing that drives me insane is to refer to boxers as a head breed, and that's another pet thing that you will have heard me ranting on about. But you know, the original breed stand was talking about the overall appearance, actually even talked about colour, before I got anywhere near talking about the head. The head, of course, is important. It's important in all breeds. But actually, to me, you know, when you come in, your first look around the class, what you're looking for is that balance we were talking about earlier, and an eye-catching correct outline, certainly helped by good angulation front and back, good balance, height to wither, slightly sloping top line, and that was because it was a Crufts, I thought a decent picture to put in to illustrate. Talking about the original breed standard, where it was talking about overall appearance first, which it does, it actually talks about colour and markings before it gets anywhere near talking about head as well. So obviously colour and markings must be important. I had to wear a jacket up there, so I put this one in because she had a nice colourful jacket on. Clearly it's the dog we're looking at. As far as the colour and jacket markers are concerned, look, we don't need to, everyone always says that, oh, do you like reds or brindles? No. I like a good quality colour that isn't washed out and markings that complement it as opposed to detract from it. Where you guys over here score absolutely 3,000 times better than we do is you get that nice fine coat, you get the short coat, which again, feature of the breed. Ours can tend to be a little shaggy. In fact, I've seen a few here this week which are perhaps shaggier than I've been used to seeing, but you get that fine skin, that fine coat, you're a rich colour, you put that on a nice eye-catching outline that we were just looking at, and you're onto a winner. But as we all know, white marking is not required, not essential. My observation on it, which I think shared with you over years, is actually white markings on the face can be completely irrelevant. It's quite hard if you don't have socks, because I think it robs the dog of a little height. It's just optical illusion, something I've observed over the years. Okay, if you're a Boxer U regular, you'll be pretty sick of seeing this photograph because I use it all the time, and I use it all the time because I think it is perfection. My opinion of that, you can forget your Munich silhouettes and all the other things that people talk about. That is a real dog, and I always use that when I'm talking to anybody about Boxer heads. I think in profile, it's as close to what we want as it is possible to get. The things I absolutely love about it is this absolute balance of 1/3 muzzle, 2/3 skull. And it still slightly depresses me that we do multiple choice exams back home on the breed stand that people have to pass to just even start getting up the judging ladder. And it's absolutely incredible. One of the distractor questions in it is taken straight from the Boston Terrier standard, which says the muzzle should be 1/3 the length of the skull. Now that is a very different thing than a head, which is 1/3 muzzle and 2/3 skull. So some people seem to get in a pickle about this, but from tip of nose to inside corner of eye to occiput, those are the points we're looking at. And look, we all know that you logically can have a long 1/3 to 2/3, you can have a short 1/3 to 2/3, but we've got a medium-sized breed of dog, and that to me is the sort of moderation we're then looking for. I also particularly love about this head is the amount of rise of skull that it's got. If you look around the Boxer worldwide, you will find a huge range in terms of amount of rise of skull. So as in continental Europe, you get these very, very abrupt foreheads, which are really kind of bizarre to look at. I think in other parts of the world, they have a much more moderate rise of skull, which gives a flatter looking head. I think the example we have here is nicely unexaggerated, and in my opinion is broadly correct. Where you guys have always scored in head more than we have, you'll be fully aware that in other parts of the world, the ignoramuses out there will say, oh, heads in America are terrible. That's the kind of received wisdom. And I always pull them up on that, because you see some absolutely beautiful heads here in terms of cleanness and balance. And the one thing you tend to get more than anywhere else, you do tend to get that tip tilt to the nose when you view them in profile, which that adds an awful lot to the finish of a Boxer head. I love the cleanness of the flues, the set of the ear. I'm happy for somebody to express different opinions in Q&A, but I think that is an outstanding head in profile. That dog was born in 1976. Okay, We then come to the head front on, which has over the years got us into all sorts of tangles. And it's got us into all sorts of tangles because of the famous book called Boxer Blarney, which Marion Fairbrother, the dog right at the beginning, which I put up as an example of balance, the black and white photograph, he was owned and bred by a lady called Marion Fairbrother, who was very much, she was one of the three ladies right at the start of the breed in the UK that really got us on the map. So she was a proper doyenne. And she wrote a book with Peggy Thompson, who spent a lot of her life in the US, was married to a chap called Alan Haslam. And Marion and Peggy, they worked for a very, very wealthy chap who was called Martin Summers. And during one summer, Martin paid for both pair of them to go to he rented them a flat in Cannes in the south of France. And they disappeared off to the south of France, and they wrote this book called Boxer Blarney. They went swimming in the morning and did the writing in the afternoon. And in that book, Marion Fairbrother was the illustrator, Peggy was the one who did the writing. Marion has drawn these sort of cartoon-like boxes, in my opinion, where she's drawn the muzzle the same width as the skull. And there's still far too many people that I come across who try and tell me that the boxer muzzle, that should be as broad as the skull. I can honestly say I've never, ever seen it. You might see it when a puppy's a day old, perhaps, but you just don't get it. So of course, the US standard, where it talks about muzzle being 2/3 the width of the skull, that actually comes from the original German stand book, which was their training manual for judges. So this is back to country of origin and the early material they had. This whole idea, muzzle being 2/3 width of skull, I believe is what's required. The UK standard just talks about muzzle and skull being balanced. But I think head on, that's a really attractive head. I love the cleanness of it all the way through. You'll have heard me talking before about brick-shaped heads. That was another of Marion's inventions. I think she probably nicked it off from one of her many US trips she made. But people sometimes laugh about it, but I know what they mean by brick-shaped head. A boxer head should have length about it. Yes, we're brachycephalic, but it should have some length about it, and it should be clean all the way through. The minute I was talking to Joe earlier about, I would say the minute you look at any boxer head, and if you're thinking round in any shape or form, it is definitely not correct. Absolutely. So if you look at that, it looks round, it's got something going seriously wrong with it, because it shouldn't have any hint of that. You should have this cleanness all the way through, lovely clean through the back skull, and I think that's a very good example. Okay, I talked briefly about eyes earlier on. I just captured all of this under one word: expression. It's what we look at, and we'll all have personal opinions on it. We absolutely will. And actually, the bounds of the standard are quite generous in terms. I talked about eyes already, where it doesn't even tell you what shape the eye should be. That's something you've got to learn and basically kind of work out for yourself. But that picture, which is this was a picture called Champion Shiloh Dougal Mug, who was sired by a Spanish import to the UK. So she's basically half continental, half English bred. But I think as an example of boxer expression, I think, again, my opinion, that's a very, very appealing head to look at. Helped enormously by the density of the pigmentation. If you get that dense pigmentation, the proper dark brown eyes, big nose, big nostrils. I think the shape of that eye is really quite lovely. I'd be really, really happy looking at that for a very long period of time. Okay, we've talked about the static dog. Let's talk about the kinetic dog. So, it's all of this is coming together nicely. If you've got a very well balanced exhibit with very good balanced angulation front and back, everything about the boxer movement should appear smooth, effortless, and unhurried. The minute your eye is seeing, choppiness or a lot of activity going on, or any degree of sort of untidiness or there's something going wrong. A lot of that is driven by an imbalance between forehand and hind angulation. Hind angulation tends, if you're going to generalise, you tend to be slightly upright in front. That tends to be the predominant fault. But there's then more hind angulation. Therefore, things are either you'll see vertical motion, And of course, vertical motion is a complete waste of time because you want to get from here to over there, so you want to be low to ground. And this is a very normally constructed dog. You know, our breed is not difficult to understand. You know, you've got your 90-degree angulation in front, you've got balanced, similar angles out back, and you should be getting a very coordinated picture. This dog, I think that was pictured at Sydney Royal, is an Australian dog. I've always thought as a picture is a really good example of, you know, low to ground, he's reaching out in front, well beyond his nose, and I saw this dog in person, it was a very, very effortless thing. And I find sometimes people want to go at 1,000 miles an hour and it's all arms and legs going in all directions. It really shouldn't look like that. This should look like a well-oiled machine which is using minimum amount of effort for maximum effectiveness. And then let's just talk about temperament for a minute. It's a little bit of a bugbear of mine. Anyone here that's had a lot of boxers over the years will know that occasionally you'll get one that isn't the bravest. Sometimes you get the other way as well, but you all know that. That's not a sin to have that because it kind of happens to the best of us. It is a sin if you perpetuate it, breed from it, expect to win with it, and it's definitely a sin if you've got judges who are forgiving of it. You know, this is a breed. The reason that picture went up, that's a dog called Champion Marbles and Dressed to Kill. He was predominantly continental bred. He was an all-breed best in show winner. He was top working dog 1 year. But irrespective of any things you do or don't like about him, that dog owned the ground that he stood on. He came out, he was there. There was no mistaking the fact that he was there. Nothing would ever faze him. He put his heart and soul into his showing. And I think, in a single black and white picture, that to me that's what a boxer should be all about. You should not need a shovel to get your boxer off the floor. And if you do, that has no place in breeding programs. So what I've attempted to do is to canter through various aspects of the boxer that I think are really important to this sort of concept of good breed type that we've covered many times in these lectures, but with a focus on examples of the really good and in the context of a full picture of the dog. So it was supposed to be thought-provoking, it was supposed to be a swift canter through, and it's now the opportunity, if anyone's got any views, comments, thoughts, challenges, I'm more than happy to take them in the final 5-10 minutes that we've got together this afternoon. We have a question from Sarah Neely.
Tim, can you talk about the eye tightness? Because in my opinion, some of the photos you showed of the pretty heads, beautiful head and expression, the eyes seemed a little bit loose.
Okay.
Do you find that is something normal in the UK? Because here it's kind of miss.
Okay, so the question was for the benefit of the videographer. In terms of the eyes that we've got, is there a risk that sometimes you get the eyes being a little bit looser than we would like? I think the short answer to that question is it's an exaggeration, and so we've got to be really, really careful about it. I think I'm not sure, let me just go back to the picture. I'm not sure that I find that eye loose, if I'm being honest. So maybe it's degree. Views? Is that eye loose, do people think?
Yes.
Little bit, slightly?
A little bit. Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I think we've established that if it is, it's a little bit. I personally don't find it loose, but I think the question is really good because you've then observed something where over here they probably are a little bit tighter. I think it goes with the minute you get a bit more work in the head, quite often that looseness does creep in, and it's one of those areas where if you're not careful, it's the route to the chocolate box look, which is we've just got a little bit of loose, and then the next generation is a little bit more, and then all of a sudden, that is too loose, it's health issues. And Pat Withers always used to say, Pat Withers was a cantankerous old cow, she really was. And I remember saying once, she said, Tim, I love getting on because you can be extremely rude to people and get away with it. Which left me thinking, why would anybody want to do that? Anyway, oh yes, and the Pat Withers story was, I know AI makes this a bit wrong, but she always said, all of a sudden the first generation will find that humans have gone a little bit exaggerated, then it's a bit more, and a bit more, and a bit, and then all of a sudden the dogs that are correct are 17 years old, they're all dead, and there is no way back. That's where the AI maybe comes in. So I think it's a really good example of, if we're not careful, and in some countries they do, they like it because it's a bit, and they go a bit too far, and it's a path we've got to be really, really careful of. The other thing just about eyes that I don't know if anyone's got a view on this, is I've said the breed standard doesn't tell you what shape the eyes are, and it does not. I never ever know how to describe them to people. The best, I think, Pat Heath was a very well-established and famous breeder in the UK. Pat always said to me, it's like a diamond with the edge, with the sort of corners softened. And I sort of can see that, ish. I don't think it's brilliant by any means, but I've never heard anything better than that. So I do tend to rely on it, but not softened too much, because we don't want exaggeration.
We typically say lemon.
Well, and that's really interesting, because I used to say that, and I just can't make myself say it. Because the minute, I don't want the word lemon associated with eyes in any shape or form, because I can't get the colour out of my head. So I think it's a good one, but it's, my God, please, all of a sudden I'm then thinking bright orange, no, fine. So that's why I don't use it, but yes, thank you. Barry.
The boxer's always described as a head breed. Is that a perception of an all-breed judge, or is that how we tend to embrace the breed here in the United States?
Okay, Barry has lit my blue touch paper and is now going to retire. His question was, is this a head breed? Has that arisen because of all-rounders, or have we done it to ourselves? I tend to say every breed is a head breed. Because if you're being honest, the thing you sort of look at, it's such a differentiating factor for all breeds. It sort of came home to me when I was talking to somebody with rough collies, and I don't know about you, and they'll tell you they're head breeds. I'm looking at it thinking, well, how on earth can that be a head breed? Well, then they talk about parallel planes and all the things that, in their opinion, make it that way. And the rough collies in the UK, if you go and watch them, they are among the unsoundest breeds you'll ever see. Because those breeders, it's a head breed, and they're just obsessed by parallel planes, and they focus on it too much. So I'm always obsessive by saying to people, it is not a head breed. All breeds are head breeds. Because the minute you say it's a head breed, and I'm going to be controversial here, I think this is where the Europeans go wrong in many, many ways, is it becomes the be-all and end-all. And they're focusing on that one thing, almost to the exclusion of all others. And as we know, breeding is like spinning plates. You have to keep all the plates going. You've got all the structural stuff to worry about, you've got the temperament to worry about, you've got all the health stuff to worry about, where all of this has got to be held in some kind of balance. And so I don't like anything that starts prioritising one thing over another. And I still come back to that original breed standard, which talks about general appearance first. That's most important. It's then, how do all the individual bits fit together? That's important. It's then colour and markings. And eventually it gets to talk about head. So I think the clue is in that as well. So let's not obsess by it. I think the other thing is, it's often used almost as a weapon against all breed judges. Because, and the bulldog people are even worse at this than perhaps the boxer people, is you sort of try and make it, I talk to so many judges when they're approaching boxers, and they sort of start off by saying, oh God, the heads are really, I don't understand the heads at all, the heads are so difficult, aren't they? You know, you can't, unless you've been in this breed for 50,000 years, you'll never ever understand them. And they then start obsessing about them, and they forget that their job is actually to kind of keep us honest on the, you know, the construction, the movement, the rest. We're a bit blessed at home in that we probably have, let's say, 65% breed judges and 35% all-rounders. In that system, you're probably well skewed the other way. In a system where you've got a lot of specialist judges, I actively tell the all-rounders, come on, your job and you focus on the things you understand, the construction, the movement, keep us all honest on that. And yes, of course you have to understand the head, but don't start trying to come in and do a specialist job on us, because we've got plenty of them already. So I think it's slightly, as it's weaponised to make people feel they never going to understand this breed. But I don't actually think it's that difficult to get your head round. Excuse the pun. That's not a long answer. Any final thought? Medley.
Can you speak a little bit about, the pictures you've shown us are all European?
They're all, no, there's some Australian in there as well.
Well,
But, yeah.
not American.
None of them are American.
And I'm looking at this dog right now, and the under jaw where the top lip touches the bottom lip,
Yeah.
in my opinion, is beautiful.
Yeah.
We are lacking that.
Agreed.
And we say, you know, you look at a dog and you think it's a beautiful head, body, peg-legged. And how, I was gonna say, go back through the pictures so we can see.
Yeah.
That's another one, that's
Yeah.
right where it should be. Why have we lost that?
Um,
How have we lost that?
Right. I think we've lost it, and I think I probably should clarify as well that I don't think chins in the UK are particularly good.
Okay.
These are, I mean, that is a continental bred bitch. The fawn bitch with the eyes we then had the debate about, she's by a continental dog. So I think they're good examples of exactly the point you're making, Benny. I think the reason why we've lost it is it's very hard to get width of jaw and it coming far enough forward that it meets the top lip. That's a real balance. And if you get that balance wrong and you get, this much, too much chin, instantly, there's no disqualifications in the UK standard, but showing your teeth is about as close to one as I can think of. I think if you breed to try and get the chin, I think you get a lot of examples where you've got too much of it and then they're in a pet home. So I think we all breed a little bit conservatively, because if you've got that much too little chin, you'll still win and you'll, in inverted commas, get away with it. I think that's why it happens. It's not an excuse. The continental breeders, as if you go to one of the big shows in Europe, you'll see quite a lot of dogs there which are catching their teeth or perhaps got a bit of tongue out, because they're a bit more forgiving of it, because they're very, very keen that they get that correct chin and lip to lip placement. But it's a really, really good point, because it is such a thing, when you have got it, it is such a thing of beauty when it's exactly right. The minute it's a little bit too much, you get one looking like monkeys. The minute it's not enough, they start looking a bit Danish. And that balance is really, really hard. And that's a difficult one to breed for, just like shoulders and height of wither is difficult. So I think we're bad at it because it's quite hard to do. But it is such a thing of beauty. And it's one of those, I talked about tip tilt to the nose. I almost talked about chin in that section, so it was a way you couldn't see in the profile shot. But a really good question, because I think tip tilt to nose, good width of under jaw, proper lip to lip placement, these are really, really important things that contribute to correct breed type. And again,
Nostrils.
nostrils.
We over here, we are more pinched. In my understanding, or my, experience was, we have a longer muzzle. So does it really matter to the American dogs that we're more pinched? You showed us a couple of pictures with good wide nostrils.
Yeah.
But then the stop is further back, the chin is.
That's fascinating.
Is that something, Tim, that should be accepted over here and say, we're not in the UK, we don't have the same type of things?
Really good question. Actually, in my ignorance, I sort of always assumed that with a longer nose, the nostrils tend to be more open, because you think of, does and labs and all the rest of it there. So I kind of assumed your nostrils might have been more open. And again, it's one of these points where I'm probably being far too kind to the UK dogs, because there's maybe not pinch, but we get more stenotic nostrils than we want. And it happened at Crufts 3 or 4 years ago, Joe, when one of the campaign groups went around and literally photographed the boxers on the benches at Crufts, and there was an awful lot of noses which were considerably more stenotic than you would like. It's possible to get them open, and I think it's one of those areas, it's a bit like the 1/3 to 2/3. I don't know how overwhelmed you'll become in North America by the animal rights lobby and legislation and whatever. There's no question back home that at 1/3 muzzle to 2/3 skull, we sort of teeter on the edge of what the lobby views as acceptable. So I just do not understand why people want to go for shorter noses in that sort of environment. And equally, this whole thing about nostrils, we have to be breeding for open nostrils, because we can make the argument as much as we like about, well, this can still breathe okay, but functionally, common sense tells you that having an open nostril is good and having a pinched nostril is bad. Therefore, I think it's one of those things that we do need to focus on, because otherwise we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. And you can see what's happening with the Frenchy people, because they really do have problems on that score. And it's something we don't want to sleepwalk ourselves into. Anything back to the eye question, the length of muzzle question, the nose question, we've just got, let's not let ourselves down by doing things that are really indefensible.
May I ask one more?
You may.
In the UK, do you do the performance activities the way we do over here?
No.
Yeah.
No, we-
So my point is, we do fast cat. They're running at top speed, and when the fast cat is over, they're fine. They're not tired. They're
Yeah.
not gasping for air. So they're not. I know we need to breed for a better width of nostril, but I don't know how you do that.
No.
How do you do it?
So I think the question was all around fitness of show dogs, show performance dogs, fitness of the breed and ability to recover from exercise quickly. Is that related to noses? Is that length of nose? Question mark. The bit, it's sort of answering the question, but I really do feel passionate about it. Dog breeders are a nightmare for saying, well, mine are okay. Right, okay. The lobbies, I've noticed this so much lately, they have got the facts and the evidence that they then use against us. So you saying my dog can go for a run is fine, in the brave new world, it doesn't wash. What we need to do as breeders is participate in the right schemes that evidence the fact that maybe our dogs are long-lived. I hear all the time, oh, mine's a very long-lived line. Well, is it? Can you prove it? What numbers? Is this scientifically, is it significant? And to your questioning topic, Medley, I don't know whether you have the BOAS scheme over here, which is brachycephalic obstructive airways syndrome, I think. And so what we did as a breed was we participated enthusiastically in that. I love this as a test because it's so simple. Well, it's simple if you can run. If there's no need you can't run, you're a bit stuffed. Because you have to run your dog around the block and then they just basically listen to it. And what they found with that is its breathing obstruction is much more to do with neck than it is to do with nostrils and the rest of it. It's bulking around the neck that is the problem. And so we had the people from Cambridge University, they'd been invited to a load of shows. We had a decent number of boxes done, and it was only about 2 or 3% that was graded worse than clear. And that is a brilliant place to be, because we then demonstrated, to your point, you've got a whole load of performance dogs you can, you kill the nostril argument if you've got scientific proof that says these dogs are perfectly functional, they breathe perfectly well. So things like that we've got to be absolutely brilliant at, because we need the science and the evidence behind it to protect ourselves. I've gone slightly over where I thought actually. Is there any final confusions? Or shall I release us?
Release the hounds.
As ever, guys, look, it's a privilege and an honour for me to do these things. I do like talking. I like sharing thoughts. I like people having their own views back as well. I hope it's kind of helped and been thought-provoking for you. As Ginny said, I can't be here next year because I'm judging St Bernard's for the first time. I'll be at Westminster though, if anyone's going to Westminster. You've been a really, really attentive audience. Pleasure as always. Thank you very much.
Is judging the boxer tonight, Tomorrow. It's
Tomorrow.